Welcome back to the Open Wide the Doors podcast here at the St. John Paul II Parish family. I'm your host for today, Erin Wright. When many of us hear the word stewardship, we might immediately think about budgets, volunteering, or annual commitments. But in the life of the church, a stewardship is something much deeper. It's about recognizing that everything we have is a gift from God and responding with gratitude. Today's episode invites us to think differently, not simply about what we give, but about who we are becoming. I'm joined today, Archdiocesan Parish Vitality Specialist, Lisa Anslinger, to talk about the Grateful Disciples approach and how it's helping parishioners move beyond programs and toward a culture of intentional discipleship. So, welcome, Lisa. Thank you for joining our parish podcast.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be with you.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. I'm so happy that we're reaching outside of our parish boundaries and talking to some people outside of our immediate parish family.
That's wonderful.
So, when you hear the word stewardship, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I have to say that this has developed for me over many years, but I would say now it's about nurturing and sharing the abundance of God's gifts and grace in my life. And the the recognition that all that we are and all that we have is entrusted to us, and we're called to not only to care for it, like to protect it, but actually nurture it to yield with increase.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's stewardship is like really trying to figure out what to do with God's gifts.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people think of stewardship and they think of money and like you're supposed to be giving money, and it's not
Right.
just monetary. It is what gifts have been given to you, and how can you share that with your
Right.
community, with the world, with whoever you come across.
Yeah.
And yeah, stewardship is just such an important part of our lives.
And it really is about the way in which we follow Jesus. And when we
Yeah,
and
yeah,
people often talk about, stewardship as a way of living as a disciple. And that really is so much of what stewardship is about, so much so that the bishops in the United States, when they wrote their pastoral letter on stewardship, they actually called it stewardship a disciple's response, because it's the way in which
oh,
we follow Jesus with our lives, and that truly can make a difference in our own individual life and certainly in the life of our faith communities.
yeah, absolutely. I like that the discipleships, like how are we following Jesus with our
Yeah.
lives? Like how are we being true disciples? That's yeah, such a great way to put it.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too that the bishops, many times in the course of that pastoral letter, talk about vocation. And they're really meaning vocation in that way that, we each have a certain way of life that we're called to, a state of life, be it married, be it priesthood, be it religious life. But then there's this other call within the call. And so we're constantly discerning, how is God calling me at this moment to use my gifts well and in service of others? And when we do that, we find this incredible meaning in our life that we wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you pointed out like the call within the call. It
Yeah.
is we're called to a certain vocation. All right, but then what exactly in that vocation are you called to? Like a marriage, you're called to parenthood, you're called
Right.
to like raising these children, like and
Right.
caring for your husband. Like there's so many calls within the call. It's not just you discern your vocation, you discern this big call, and this there's discernment in every moment.
Yeah, and it changes in time. The things that
Mhm.
I'm called to now as a semi-retired grandmother is different than when I was in my, mid-30s and working in a parish and had 2 young children and all of those things. And so
Yeah,
in each moment of our lives, we're discerning those calls.
yeah, absolutely. It's just the whole thing. It's not
Yeah, it
just
is.
like I said, it's not just one and done. It's you're
Yeah,
throughout your whole life, every day.
I love that. Yes.
So, have you ever had a moment when generosity changed your heart more than just your bank account?
Yes. And I I was thinking about this as I was preparing for our conversation and, being introduced to stewardship and really taking the stewardship message to heart truly has changed my perspective on everything. But I think some of my most powerful experiences of stewardship weren't only as a giver, but also as a recipient of another's stewardship. And I was remembering I was a parish evangelization director and was involved in stewardship ministry for about a dozen years. And in those early years, as we were just beginning to talk with our people about stewardship, and we were all really reflecting on what does that mean. My mother lived with my husband and our two children and I, and she became ill in the midst of the Lent where I was the temporary director of worship, but I was also the new RCIA director. And we had already been planning how were we going to handle the Lenten season with all of the liturgies and the OCIA, processes and so on. And in fact, she passed away the Tuesday before Easter, so the Tuesday of Holy Week. And all of a sudden, all of these parishioners, as they heard, they started coming and saying, "What can I do? Let me take care of the final preparation of the worship aid. Let me take care of picking up the things in the back of church after Holy Thursday," and on and on and on and on, because people wanted me to be able to grieve even in the midst of celebrating the Triduum. And to find the grace to say, this is the gift that God knows that I need right now, and I'm being given that gift by the stewardship of others has stuck with me now for, our daughter was it would have been 30 years ago. Our daughter was 6 and so it's just amazing when we realize the gift of being present to God's grace, being aware of God's grace, and and accepting that, and then responding to that in whatever way it's given. And in that particular moment, it was given through the stewardship of others.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. That's such a great story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah,
and thank God, and thank all those people so many years ago. It's obvious that had an impact.
yeah, absolutely. Like I love hearing things about like the community of people when
Yeah,
something tragic happens or something happens in a member of the community's life and other people just step up and they're there to help them through whatever struggle
yeah,
they may be going through.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
Locally, just a year ago, so many of us were just incredibly heartbroken with the fire at St. John's, and
Yeah.
but to see the outpouring of love and care of our local archdiocesan community in that moment, again, it's such a powerful witness to the way in which all of us can be transformed throughout all of our ages and stages of life and faith.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so personal and so much bigger than just like thinking about myself and like, oh, something happens to me and like I'm gonna keep it
Yeah,
to myself and I'm not just gonna let anybody help me. But like opening that up to your community and letting your community and those around you help you and just seeing the generosity and whatever sacrifice other people are willing to give you.
yeah,
It's so beautiful.
yeah,
So amazing.
yeah. And sometimes it's not the huge thing. Sometimes it's a little thing.
Hmm.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it's just, taking that moment to stop in the grocery store and talk to somebody, and where everything in us is saying, I've got to go home and fix dinner. But we just have that sense that that person needs 5 minutes of our time, and
Yeah.
I think one of the wonderful things that I've experienced in stewardship over the years is just that recognition that time is a gift. Faith is a gift. Our relationships are gifts, and to be good stewards of those kind of gifts really then helps us to think about all of the ways in which we're called to be good stewards. And yes, it does include money. It's just not only about money. And I think once we take all of that to heart, then when we start to think about, well, how am I being a good steward of, we often use that phrase time, talent, and treasure. That's just a way of saying it's about more than any of those things. It really is all of that and then some. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you mentioned like it's stewardship of your time and of your faith. And it doesn't have to be like you have to have
Yeah.
set aside time for like however many hours. It's just,
Right.
it's 5 minutes, a 5 minute conversation with someone who may need it. 5 minutes of attention for somebody. Like it's literally, it could be so small, but like whatever you're able to give, no matter how much time, like it's anything is a gift. And
Yeah.
it's recognizing that you are able to give something and not just be self-centered and like think of yourself all the time. It's just stepping outside of yourself and thinking of the needs of whoever you are with in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so beautiful. So, what is the Grateful Disciples program, and how is it different than like from a typical stewardship?
Mhm. And Grateful Disciples really came out of many years of talking with parish leaders about stewardship, and especially talking with other stewardship people that were more experienced with stewardship than I was. And people would say, "We know that this isn't a program. We might have a certain beginning point where we begin to introduce stewardship to our people, but there is no end. There is no end point at which we say we're done with this because it's ongoing." And yet, we need to be able to look at what are the things that most often help people and parishes to grow in the ways of stewardship. And so I actually started kind of sketching something out. And I had already written a number of books and articles and things like that. And so I started working on a workbook and I began to send it out to friends of mine who were stewardship leaders. And I asked them to be critical readers with me and to send their thoughts. And they did. They sent some really practical things, but they also really encouraged me to do this. It was like, this, we need this, we need this. And so I ended up developing not only the workbook, but a website to support the workbook. And so the workbook actually, and in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, people have free access to the workbook. It's on the website. People can use it in any way that they would like. But it has, for each of the chapters, it has some video, it has samples of what parishes have done, it has worksheets that teams can use, and it really is based in the idea that there are these kind of predictable steps that parishes typically employ in order to lead people to understand themselves as stewards and then to live that within the faith community. And so first is just that real recognition of what stewardship is all about. And I look at, kind of the theology, the spirituality of stewardship, including making some really practical connections with Mass. The Eucharist, the word Eucharist means thanksgiving, and so our very celebration of the Mass is a celebration of thanksgiving for the blessings of life and faith and the sacrifice of Jesus. And so that spirituality, and then next, looking at leadership. Most families of parishes that introduce stewardship find that it's best and easiest if you've got a team, that you develop a team that begins to discern what does our parish need right now. And how might we invite people to take a step, to stretch a little bit, to not only take that message to heart, but to really think about that call in all of the various moments of life and certainly within the course of a year. And then we begin to think about how do we form people? How do we help people to understand what stewardship is all about? How do we do that within the context of the community? How do we help people to really feel at home with us so that they're going to be ready to grow? They're going to be open to conversion. I love that the bishops in the introduction to the pastoral letter, they say beginning in conversion, change of mind and heart. This stewardship way of life really is a way of life. It's about an ongoing conversion in Christ. And then most parishes that are inviting their people to think about themselves as stewards begin to develop some kind of regular rhythm of renewal and commitment. It's we have to make a commitment if we're really going to live this in a profound way, in a serious way. And then as I, kind of sent this to friends all over the United States and in other parts of the world and asked them for their reactions, we found that it needs to be depicted as a circle because it is an ongoing thing. And so rather than kind of this line that says, here's the beginning point, because we're never done, and so, just as soon as we feel like everybody is on board with this, well, then we find that no, we need to deepen that understanding. And we're going to have new people come along, and people are going to be in different moments of their lives. And so it becomes this cycle. And that's what the Grateful Disciples process ended up becoming is a way of helping leaders to grow in their capacity to bring all of that to their communities.
Wow, that's so amazing. I love that there's steps and there's things that you gotta first think about the gifts that God has given you. And like 'cause everybody's different. Everybody has different situations. Some people are more outgoing, some people are like, yeah, everyone's different. And then figuring out how those gifts, like God is calling you to use those gifts. And like the first like recognizing like God is giving me these gifts and now I can share them. But like how do I share them? And then you help them figure that
Right.
out.
Right.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And the other thing about that is when we do that, and when we do that together, we also then take that moment to pause and say, "Thank you, Lord, for this." And that in and of itself just deepens that desire to go deeper. And I often find myself telling stewardship leaders, it isn't always about more. Sometimes it's about deeper. And so as we're inviting people to think about how are they living as stewards, yes, in fact, they may be called to give more of their time, to give more of their financial resources, to give more of their attention. But it may be that they're being invited to do that more deeply and to grow in their relationship with the Lord in a deeper way as a result. And I think that's really something that's really important for us because otherwise it can just look like a whole lot of stuff and it can look like a whole lot of busyness. And in fact, sometimes it can look like, oh, this is just another fancy way of coming to get our money, when it isn't that. This is about recognizing God's grace and then responding to that in all of the ways that we might. And people a lot of times will say to the priest, why do you keep talking about money? Well, the fact is Jesus talked about money. And so, when we're going through that cycle of gospels, and in the course of 3 years, we're gonna hear Jesus talk about money, and then the priest is gonna have to, help us to break that open because that's his responsibility. But Jesus did that because he understood that money is a hard thing, and so he wanted us to recognize the privilege of sharing our resources and recognize the impact of that, and then also to recognize that we have a need to give as people who are created in God's image. God is love, and and that love is always going to be expressed. And so to be a person that's created in God's love means that we're called to give. We have a need to give. And so, as stewardship leaders, we're called to help people to find that need to give. What is it that they need to give in this moment of life? And then how will they do that?
Yeah, that's so amazing. I figured out like giving deeper, like figuring out what God is calling you to on a deeper level and
Yeah.
how you can give more deeply and care more deeply. I feel like a lot of times, especially in our faith and our prayer life and other aspects of our life, some things can feel like we're just checking,
Yeah.
doing something just to get it. I prayed today. Oh, I went to mass today. I gave however much money in the office today. I smiled at somebody. Like but taking time to like, yeah, you're right. It's always about giving more self, more of your time, whatever. Are you valuing the quality of time that you're giving somebody? Like, are you making sure that it's not just checking a box? It's
Right.
like there's true meaning in whatever you are doing and whatever you are giving.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's really important for us to remember.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, so why is the word grateful so important in this book?
I think there's so much that surrounds us in our lives that says we need more stuff. We need something better. And what stewardship helps us to learn to do is to be aware of the blessings. And the more we grow in gratitude for all of that, the more free we are to not be so consumed by the stuff. And in really to see life and to live life through a perspective of abundance rather than of scarcity, and there's a whole lot around us that says we'll never have enough, we'll never be enough. And that's not what our faith teaches us. Our faith teaches us that the Lord Jesus gave everything for us. And as followers of Jesus, we need to learn and to be open to all of the ways that we can grow in gratitude for that, to be Eucharistic people. And so for me, stewardship really is all about gratitude, and then that grateful response, which is life changing.
Yeah, you're right. Sometimes it can feel like I need this next thing to
Yeah,
be happy. I need this status to be happy. I need to have this house, this much money in the bank account
right.
to be happy. But like really, every breath we have is a gift. You're right. Like Jesus gave everything for us. And, there are people in the world who don't have as much as we have and are still like so much more joyful than some of the people here in our community just because they are like realize that everything that they have is a gift from God. This culture is definitely like, I need more, I need, but if you take a moment to recognize the gifts and like how amazing it is that we are here today on this earth talking to this particular person or interacting with whoever. It's so beautiful and it's so
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. And it's also a way of kind of undoing some of the burdens that we put on ourselves unnecessarily, because if we're not consumed by all the stuff, then we have the freedom to say, okay, what am I called to be? Or what am I called to do in this moment? And there's something just incredible. I mean, and I think we recognize that when we meet someone who truly has taken all of this to heart. We recognize the blessing of being free when we're with someone who is. And then we grow from that. Yeah.
Yeah, it is so impactful when you do meet somebody that is just so grateful for everything that they've been given
Yeah.
and are in turn giving everything that they have to back to the Lord in whatever way He's calling them to. And I've had some interactions with people like that personally, and I'm just like, I look at that, I'm like, man, I want to be like that. I want to
Yeah.
be joyful
Yes.
and I want to be like so grateful and just take everything like,
Right.
all right, here's my interaction for the day with this person. Like, it may not have been the best, but I'm grateful that I got to talk to this person
Exactly.
today and like
Exactly.
grateful for whatever comes your way. It's amazing to come across those people. And it is definitely like very hard when you meet someone like that and you're like, yes, I want to do that. But then you're like,
Right.
how
Yeah.
can I be like that? How can I find the gratitude in everything? Because it is
Yeah.
challenging when you're in this culture and you've been trained to think that you shouldn't be satisfied until you have whatever the most expensive things.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful that some of the people that I learned the most about stewardship from, had really taken it to heart in such a way that it did change the way they lived their lives. And as you were talking, I was remembering a large conference now, and it probably would have been 15 years ago. And one of the people that I learned so much about stewardship from is Bishop Emeritus Sylvester Ryan from Monterey, California. And by that time, Bishop Ryan was retired and he was older. And we were at this conference, and he stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and said, and took my hands and said, "Lisa, how are you doing?" And I mean, it was like for that, probably 5 minutes, I was the only person that he was focused on in this, the sidewalk with thousands of people trying to rush to get to sessions and all of that stuff. But he was completely present to the person that he was with, whoever that person was, wherever that person was, and
Mm.
and I walked away thinking to myself, am I ever that present to anything or anybody? But
Yeah.
in reflecting on that, I started thinking about, okay, so this can be a goal for me. I can grow in this, and it's not like it's hard. It just takes a little bit of awareness and willingness, and again, that stuck with me.
Yeah, like doing things with intention. And yeah, like it's not just a casual greeting or whatever. Like it's not, like I said earlier, it's not just checking a box, but like having a conversation with intention, giving time with intention, giving money with intention,
Yeah.
whatever. It's putting more meaning behind it than just checking a box and just doing whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
So we kind of talked about this. How does Grateful Disciples move stewardship beyond just time, talent, and treasure? I know we've talked.
Mhm.
It's not just those things. It's
Yeah, it really is about spirituality. It's about putting our faith in in practice in our lives, and allowing ourselves to be changed. And so, while Grateful Disciples is really kind of developed for leaders of stewardship, it really is that way of helping all of us to think about, how are we doing that? How are we taking this spiritual way of life to heart, and recognizing that we're going to do that in all of the ways that we can throughout the course of the year, within the year of the church, and that hopefully we're going to grow as a community as a result of that. And so I often tell people that, stewardship changes individuals, but it also changes the life of the parish, or the life of the family of parishes. Because, as you and I are talking, we've already said, oh, well, yeah, we see this connection, and we see this. Well, now imagine, 1,000 people making those connections, and living this changed way of life. And it isn't only about the parish. It truly is. I mean, it starts at home. It starts in our individual life of faith with our Lord, and it happens in our families, and it happens in our parish, and it happens in our workplace, and in our local town. And so the ripple effect of that is striking. And once we have experienced that, we can't go back. We'll never look at faith again in the same way. We'll never look at faith in a community again in the same way, because we've been changed by that experience.
yeah, yeah, you're right. And it's not like you start at the home and then whoever can start small and then you like
Yeah.
get bigger and you grow and you realize that it's much bigger than yourself. There's a lot of work that needs to be done within yourself and within the home with stewardship and giving your gifts to those in your immediate household and like your prayer life and all of that. But yeah, you're right. It's like when you have more people recognize the gifts that they have and take the time and like have the intention to give those gifts out. It can impact so many people in so many like
Yeah.
profound ways.
Yeah.
It's so important to have that more people do that than
Yes.
just a handful of people. Like
Yeah.
we are a church of the thousands of people within our church, and every single one has the ability to give in whatever way they are called to. It's the world would be
Yeah.
like, can you imagine like the impact that would be held on our community?
Right.
Um, yeah,
Right. Yes.
everybody gives something.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So what does it mean to form disciples rather than simply invite people to give?
Yeah, I think we've talked about some of this already, but I think there's one of the things that we don't always have the words for, is when we talk about living faith, or even living the faith. Sometimes we don't really take the time to think about, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And in fact, that can be a challenging way of life, as well as a very meaningful way of life. And there have been a lot of articles in the last few months about this influx of people, coming into the church at the Easter Vigil, especially this year, and the blessing of that. And when we look at so many of the people, we get to know the people that were initiated at the vigil. And when we talk with them and say, what brought you to this? Many of them will say, I think I was looking for a long time. I had this something that wasn't being met, this ache in my heart, but it wasn't until someone talked to me about the Lord, or it wasn't until someone brought me to mass, or it wasn't until I heard a podcast or saw a video or whatever it was that something lit that spark and said, this is what I've been looking for. And I think when we really think about stewardship as a disciple's response, we take the time to look at what is it that the Lord Jesus teaches us. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the pure of heart, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and then whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. And wow, that's a lot, and it's going to take us a lifetime to live all of that. How are we going to do that? Each of us as the people that we are, we're going to do that by the way in which we give of the gifts that God has given us, the talents, the skills, the life, the faith, the relationships, and we're going to do that in a way that sometimes calls us to sacrifice, because that's what Jesus did. And so following Jesus is a sacrificial way of life. And yet, when we live sacrificially, we find that meaning and that purpose that we've been looking for, and we find that depth, and all that does is call us to more. I mean, it's like this well that is within us that cannot ever be emptied.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you pointed out like living sacrificially and, if we're going to be true disciples and follow Jesus, it's not going to be easy. It's not
Mhm.
just like a walk in the park. We're called to sacrifice. We're called to go like carry our cross, and it's not just everything is going to be handed to us and like everything is
Yeah,
good. It's like when you recognize that you are sacrificing things and you realize that the gifts that you have been given from God, you have the ability to give those to others, no matter how easy it may be. Giving all that you have, it's a sacrifice,
yeah,
and it's you're giving of yourself for someone else, and that's what Jesus is calling us to do is just
yeah,
sacrifice ourselves for those around us, care for those, and yeah, offer whatever we can.
yes.
So what changes have you seen in parishes that implement grateful disciples? Wow.
Yeah, I've seen parishes in so many ways come to life. And sometimes, it might be a small parish where everyone realizes that the life of the parish really is up to each of them to do what they can do, and then sometimes it's larger parishes where, they really find the way to sort of multiply ministry and be a presence in their local community and everything in between. But I think the thing that stands out for me about parishes that really have embraced the stewardship message and really are living it is that we develop a culture where every single person is of value. And every single person is not only called to, but in some ways is expected to give up themselves, because we recognize that voicing that value and that expectation is a way of leading one another to live as Christ calls. And so I've seen parishes that, take the time to say, what is most important, and really focusing on those most important things. And often the first thing that parishes do as they're embracing stewardship is just really focus on hospitality and welcome, because they want people to understand that this is a place that values them, that sees them as a child created in God's image and called and blessed in many ways. And the impact of that, I was remembering many years ago now, as my parish was kind of really growing in the way in which we experienced stewardship. And we were beginning to share that in conference workshops and that kind of thing. We had had received a call from a parish in North Carolina, and it happened that one of the pastoral council members in this parish had family in Cincinnati. And so he said, if a couple of friends and I come and we visit my family, could we meet with you, before or after Saturday evening mass? And so we met with them before mass and just kind of talked with them and showed them samples of some of our commitment forms and that kind of thing. And, just walked around a little bit telling the story of our particular faith community. And then we celebrated mass. And afterward, one of the guys went, "We don't need to talk about it anymore. Now we've experienced it." And I said, "Well, tell me, what did you experience?" And he said, "Well, first of all," he said, "we walked in and we were a pretty large parish and this church was a pretty large church building." And he said, "We walked in and three different people said, 'Are you new here?' Well, welcome. And what brings you here?" And he said, it was like, I didn't quite know what to do with all of this, and I've experienced that myself in so many different ways, and again, sometimes it's not more, it's just deeper. It's that recognition that the way in which we're going to grow as people of faith is that we're going to do this together. And in fact, one of our parishioners at one point said, "Can I share with you the impact of all of this?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "It's exactly that. It's that, I recognize when I come to mass, if I've had a really hard week, no one here expects me to like put on the mask and say, 'Oh, gee, everything's fine.' We kind of do that. 'How are you?' 'Fine.' 'How's it going?' 'Fine.' And she said, sometimes I've had just a really horrible week. And now I know that I can bring my broken self and I can be myself and celebrate that in this community because that's what the community wants for me. And so I think if we take time to listen to our people as parish leaders, most people will say, I want a faith community that helps me to recognize God's grace. I want a faith community that celebrates the liturgy well and really helps me to enter into Christ's sacrifice and to be formed by word and sacrament. I want a community that gives me opportunities to give myself in service and in ministry. That's what our people want. And how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by growing as good stewards, that each of us has been given different gifts and different kinds of combinations of gifts, and each of us is called to steward those gifts as individuals and within a community.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Everybody does wants a particular church community, and we want to feel God's grace and God's love with those that we interact with. And it can be easy to be like, right, I don't, the culture of this church isn't what I want because the church isn't run the right way, or it's because of the pastor, or it's because of whoever is in charge. But those changes are best to be done within yourself. Like, are you being the person that you want to be for that other person? Like, if you were going to this church and you wanted to receive that welcoming and that grace and that I don't care what happened this week, I am going to be here and love you no matter what. If you want that interaction, you got to be that and be that person for that other person. It can be easy to just be like, oh, change, somebody else needs to do it. Like it's not my job, but change and stewarding your gifts and recognizing God's love and all of that. It starts within and
Yeah.
the ability to share that with others.
And thank you so much for saying that because the other thing that I've seen in parishes, and this is really hard, there are a lot of people in our parishes right now that are giving and they are dedicated. And many of them have been giving, their time in ministry for many years. And sometimes it's hard for people to let others in. It's hard and some of that very honestly is if I've given myself for a long time to a ministry and I know what it takes and I know how it works, it's really hard for me to let somebody else do this because they might not do it my way. They might not even do it.
Mm,
They might let,
mm,
they might say they're going to do it and then something happens in their lives or whatever. And but how do we create a culture? You use that word culture and that's really important. How do we create a culture that says, okay, let's find ways to invite people in, but let's do it in a way that kind of safeguards the ministry, and let's build some partnerships, and let's find ways to complement one another's gifts because none of us has everything. And that's one of the miraculous ways in which God has created us. We're not all alike. We don't all have the same gifts. And it does take all of us doing what we can do. And if we don't, something's missing. And so if I've been accustomed to leading a ministry, a whatever, coat drive or whatever it is, and I know that this is the way it works. If I really step back and look at this, there are probably things that I don't particularly like to do, or maybe I don't feel well equipped to do that somebody else could do that part. And look at what could happen as a result of that ministry. And especially when people my age, I'm in my late 60s, people my age look at younger adults and say, "Well, why can't they just do things the way we did when we were young?" Well, first of all, the world is really different. And maybe when we were younger, it didn't really work the way that we kind of remember working now. I think that's kind of an age-old thing. But how do we instead say, could we do this together? And I think we probably would learn a lot from each other in the process and find ways to really bring that community to life and change that culture that you talked about. That's really important.
Yeah, yeah, you can get into the habit of, like, "It's my way," and, like,
Yeah.
"I know what's best," and all of
Right.
that, but yeah, you're right, it's not everybody has the same gifts, not everybody has everything, and just taking some time to just, recognize the gifts and the beauty of other people's gifts is so like, it's amazing, and, like, everybody's gifts can work together, and everybody can work together and create something even more beautiful than what you could have done by yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one of our older parishioners who was on our stewardship team. And so he had helped to bring stewardship to life in our parish for many years. And he had retired and had really started thinking about what is God calling me to do in this moment of my life. And he finally came to me and said, "I think I need to leave the stewardship team." And I was, oh my God, I mean, I relied on this man. And I was like, "Did we do something?" He goes, "No, not at all." He said, "But I really feel called to help with youth ministry. But if I'm going to do that, I need to be able to give my time to that in a genuine way. And I can't do both. Even as a retired person, I just don't feel like I can do both." And it was like, "Oh my gosh, go, go with God. The youth minister needs help, the youth need your help. And we felt his absence for a long time because we had relied on him, and he did bring gifts that none of the rest of us had. And so it took us a while to get into a different groove and to find other people that could become part of the team. But youth ministry received that gift of his presence and his time in a way that was wonderful and very much needed. And so, when we think about that, and here I was the one that was trying to teach everybody about stewardship, and yet there was this part of me going, but I don't know that I want this for our group. Well, yeah, I really did.
Yeah.
I knew that. I just knew that it was going to take some time for all of us to settle into this differently.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure it's hard when you have somebody who's been there and had whatever impact that has helped your ministry or your group,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they leave, and then yeah, you feel their absence, but they're
Yeah.
following God's call, so you're like, yes, I wish you the best, and I know you're doing good things, and I
Yeah.
miss what you were doing. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sure that it could be difficult. So, what happens when an entire parish begins to think like disciples instead of consumers? Like we go to church a lot and it's just like what can I receive from that?
Yeah.
What can I get from this church? And not necessarily what we can give.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you asked the question in that way. Many years ago now, I was trained by the Gallup organization to understand their research around engaging parishioners. And one of the things that their research shows is that people need to have a sense of belonging within their faith community if they're going to grow, if they're going to grow in faith and give of their time and give of their resources. And that they need to know what's expected, but they also need to know that their spiritual needs are going to be met. And the way that they describe that is by questions what can I get and what can I give? And so one of my friends who had been trained at the same time as I lives in California in the Diocese of Oakland, and her parish council had really thought about this, and they ended up developing a process where their stewardship renewal every year included this list of, here at St. Anne's, this is what you get. Okay. Now, keep in mind, you're going to get that through the ministry of others, right? But we have X number of celebrations of Mass in the course of a week. We have X number of celebrations of the Sacrament of Reconciliation. We have, sacramental preparation for adults and for children. We have faith formation for, everyone under the sun, all of these things. And then this is what we invite you to give. And they did that in different ways. They had actually developed a kind of a mission statement that said, at St. Anne's, we worship, we connect, we grow, and we serve. And so every year, the parishioners were asked to think about what they would give by way of worship, community, growth in faith, and service. And so they would make a commitment. I'm making a commitment to seriously take my responsibility to participate in Sunday Mass to heart, and I'm going to be here at Sunday Mass unless something dramatic happens. I am going to participate in the annual community whatever. And so their stewardship commitment was laid out in that way. And on the website, it actually said, here's what you get, here's what we ask you to give. And then the parishioners made a commitment as a result. And it was very interesting. I was there one year right at the end of the school year, and they had given two high school students that had been very involved in ministry a small scholarship as they were moving on to college. And they invited each of these students to offer just a few words of thanks or witness or whatever. And this young woman said, I know that here at St. Anne's, we worship, we connect, we grow, and we serve. And I'm already thinking, oh my gosh, now they've got banners all over the place. And I mean, this was part of their like mantra as a community. But then she said, and I know that I helped to start this blanket ministry to be able to give blankets to those who needed warmth in the winter months. And now I'm asking you to take that on in my absence. And I mean, the church was absolutely silent. But it was that she had taken that thing to heart that we get, but it's not this consumer. This is what I need from my parish. Certainly there are things that I need from my parish, but I also have a need to give. And the parish is going to change when I do that.
Wow. Yeah. It just one person can have a huge impact. And all of when multiple people get together and work on
Yeah.
something, we can have an even bigger. And yeah,
Yeah.
we are. I really like that model that what you get from our church and what we're asking you to give our
Yeah.
church or at our parish. That is really cool. And you laid it out for people too.
Yeah, and then their pastoral council and their stewardship team each year would reflect on, are there needs within our parish or in our local community that our parish needs to give? So, is there some population that, needs some particular service, or is there some element of the community that's not being invited to participate in faith formation or whatever that might be? And so that was part of their ongoing discernment, was what are the needs to get, in quotes, and then how might we invite people to give to that particular aspect of life.
Yeah, yeah. That's wow. That's really cool. It's not just one person. It's not just one part. It's
Yeah,
not just the leadership. It's the community within the
yeah,
church. It's not just the community within the church. It's also the leadership. Like
yeah,
everybody has a part in
yeah,
stewardship and making sure that everyone belongs and making sure that we can all give our gifts in the way that God's calling us to, and making sure that we have the ability to receive and recognize the gifts that God has given us. Yeah. So, can you share a story of someone who whose life changed through embracing stewardship?
Yeah, I'd say my own. I
Yeah.
mean, I've shared lots of examples as we've been
Yeah.
talking, but honestly, I mean, I think about the gift of recognizing myself as a steward, and I think how enriching that has been for me in the course of the last 30 years. The gift of seeing God's grace and being open to responding in the ways that I can, but then also recognizing God's grace in the way others are living it as well. That's been life changing. And I can't imagine now living life differently simply because of the gift of stewardship.
Yeah. I love how you said that, like, being open to sharing God's
Yeah.
gifts and open to, like, receiving. It's like we can sometimes, depending on the stage of our lives, sometimes we can be a little resistant to, like, I have this gift, but I don't want to take the time that I have to, like, give to other people. I don't want to take this extra money that I
Yeah.
have to don't, I don't want to,
Right.
it's being open to doing whatever God is calling us to do and just
Yeah.
going along for the ride. Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, it's when you really like stewardship is about recognizing the gifts and like sharing that. And when you have the ability to recognize those gifts and be willing to share that, and it's so beautiful. And it can have a beautiful community on our church. And it's the whole problem, really. Like one person is can do a lot of things. And
Right.
as a community, we could do so many more things.
Yes.
So
Yes.
how does hospitality connect to stewardship?
I think often hospitality, when offered in a genuine and intentional way, helps people to feel at home. And when we feel at home with one another, we're more likely to be ready to risk, to take the chance to take a step, to sacrifice, to try something new, to let somebody in, to open the door to a new way of life. And so I think hospitality very often is the first step for parishes that are beginning to embrace stewardship for a good reason. Because when we help one another to really feel at home in our faith community, it's like opening your home to, a new family member. I used to think about my adult children as they were introducing the love of their life to our family, and I watched my mom and my husband's parents, very, very gently, start telling the story of this is what she was like when she was young. This is what he did when he was a 6-year-old, and in telling the story and in welcoming them, sharing the meal, sharing the recipes, that suddenly they came to understand a little bit about what it meant to be part of our family. And I think the same thing happens in our parishes, that when we really take to heart the need to be hospitable, to welcome people warmly, we're helping them to know, what does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus in this time and this place with one another? And then in doing that, we'll grow in openness to really take this to heart and take the chance to make it a way of life.
Yeah, I really like that you pointed that out. Like that's the way that we are hospitable to those who may not be who may be new to our church or to new to our parish is it shows them what it means to be part of this church community, a part of to be a believer in Christ. And it's being hospitable. It's the way that you can get them to come back. It's the
Yeah,
way you can invite them in. And yeah, you're right. Like help them understand what it means to be a follower of Christ, because it's not just when to be a disciple, it's not just to again like focus on yourself and focus on your needs. It's just about understand, welcome others, and be nice to others, and share your gifts with others. And it's so much bigger than yourself, and it's that lifestyle is it's so attractive just to
yeah,
like when you see people living outside of themselves and sharing their gifts. It's very inspirational. as we mentioned before, like seeing like those people who are free and are ready to give themselves and like everything that they have because someone is giving up everything. It's the lifestyle is so attractive, and you see that when you come to a new parish, and you're like, yes, this is what I want. This
Yeah.
is so beautiful. I'm ready to join. I'm ready to be a part of this and give what I have
Yeah.
to others.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So I thank you, Lisa. I think that was all of the questions that I had for you. But thank you for joining us today and coming on our parish podcast. It was nice meeting you again.
It's great to meet you as well. And thank you so much for the invitation to join you. This was fun.
Yeah, yeah, I had fun too. I enjoyed this conversation. So yeah, thank you for helping us to see stewardship through a new lens, not as obligation, but as invitation. At its heart, discipleship begins with recognizing what we've already received. Every gift, every relationship, every opportunity, and every moment of grace becomes an invitation to respond with gratitude. So, yeah, as we reflect on today's conversation, perhaps the question isn't simply, what am I being asked to give? But how is God inviting me to respond to all that He has already given me? So, may we continue to grow as grateful disciples and receive generously, serving joyfully, and helping others to truly encounter Christ. Until next time, God bless.